What happens when a successful self-made woman faces an unexpected challenge while simply trying to enjoy the comfort she's worked hard for? Zoe Carter, the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company, settled into her first-class seat with the quiet confidence of someone who has earned every moment of this luxury. Little did she know, a routine flight was about to turn into an intense clash over entitlement and dignity. It all started with a mix-up, a small error that spiraled into a showdown between Zoe and a passenger who believed her long-standing loyalty to the airline granted her any seat she desired. Zoe was on her way to secure a deal that could revolutionize her business, but instead, her flight turned into a crash course in resilience. As Zoe adjusted herself in the plush seat, savoring a rare moment of peace, a tall, blonde woman approached her with an air of superiority. Her name was Julia Bennett, and she was about to demand what she thought was hers by right. Zoe, unflappable as always, would not back down. What started as a simple exchange soon became a heated standoff, drawing the attention of both fellow passengers and the flight crew. What followed would showcase Zoe's strength, resolve, and quiet dignity, qualities that would force Julia to confront the limits of her privilege. Zoe Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Innovations, sank into her comfortable first-class seat, exhaling as the last traces of stress from a high-stakes week of meetings melted away. She was heading to finalize an acquisition that would propel her company forward. This wasn't just any flight. It was a pivotal moment in her career. The sky outside glowed with the warm, golden tones of the setting sun, offering a fleeting moment of serenity before the whirlwind of business demands continued. Her seat, 1A, wasn't just a symbol of luxury. It was a tangible result of years of hard work, overcoming countless obstacles and biases that had tried to undermine her. But this moment of peace was not meant to last. A low murmur of voices reached her ears, and Zoe's keen instincts kicked in. Her gaze flicked to the front of the cabin, where a tall, platinum-haired woman entered, flanked by a companion. This was Julia Bennett, who carried herself with a palpable sense of entitlement, one Zoe had encountered many times before in her career. It was the kind of gaze that said, "I deserve this space, and you don't." Zoe could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, mix-up and unacceptable, floating through the air. Her gut tightened, sensing that trouble was approaching, but she kept her focus on her sleek leather briefcase, determined not to get involved unless necessary. Sure enough, Julia and her companion, Carla, made their way towards Zoe's row. Julia's voice, sharp and dripping with condescension, shattered the calm. "Excuse me, but I think there's been some kind of mistake," she said, eyeing Zoe's seat with visible disdain. "This is my seat." Zoe blinked but didn't flinch. "This is 1A, she replied smoothly, her tone even and calm. "I reserved this months ago," Julia insisted, a faint flicker of doubt passing over her face. "You're probably more comfortable further back," she added with a dismissive wave. "I'm a Platinum Elite member. I always sit in this row." But Zoe remained unfazed. Her pulse didn't quicken, her breath didn't catch. In boardrooms and negotiations, she'd faced much harsher challenges than this. Her resilience had been tested in ways this petty confrontation could never match. "I'm quite content here," Zoe said, her voice cool but firm. There was a quiet authority in her words, the kind forged through years of proving herself against the odds. The silence stretched between the two women, each of them locked in a silent battle of wills. Just as Julia was about to escalate the situation, a flight attendant appeared at the row, his presence cutting through the tension like a knife. "Is everything all right here, ma'am?" he asked, his voice calm yet authoritative. "Yes," Julia snapped, now turning theatrically toward him. "There's been a mistake. This seat has been assigned to someone else." The attendant turned to Zoe, who handed over her boarding pass without a word. Every motion was deliberate, as though she had done this 100 times before, because, in a way, she had. After inspecting the boarding pass, the attendant nodded respectfully. "This seat is indeed yours, Miss Carter." Julia's smug expression faltered, her irritation now apparent. "She must have upgraded," she sneered, her voice sharp. It happens all the time. Zoe's eyes met Julia's, her calm gaze unwavering. I suggest you take the seat assigned to you, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. This conversation is over. Julia's frustration reached a boiling point. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her eyes narrowing. The mask of politeness slipped, replaced by an unmistakable sneer. Do you even know who I am? She spat, her words laced with disdain. I don't fly economy. I always sit in first class. Zoe's response was measured, her tone steady. I don't need to know who you are to know that I belong here. Now, I suggest you sit down. The tension in the air was palpable, but Zoe had already won the battle. With dignity, she leaned back in her seat, reclaiming her moment of peace as Julia hesitated before retreating to her assigned seat further back in the cabin. Zoe didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but her calm composure had sent a clear message. Respect is earned, not given, and it's something no amount of privilege or entitlement can take away. Zoe Carter remained unshaken. For her, this was just another instance of navigating spaces where people like Julia try to leverage their supposed privilege to diminish her worth. She had faced far worse. She had spent her entire career proving that she belonged, regardless of what anyone thought. This was just another brief moment in time, one she would forget as soon as she had moved forward in her journey. Just as the tension between Zoe and Julia was about to escalate, a flight attendant noticed the growing conflict and swiftly intervened. If there's any issue, ma'am, you're welcome to speak with our manager, he offered, his tone calm, but his eyes showed the hesitation of someone caught in the middle of a brewing storm. Julia's anger flared. Fine, she snapped, spinning on her heel and storming off toward the front of the cabin. Her companion, Carla, trailed behind her, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. The attendant, now facing Zoe, seemed apologetic. I'm really sorry for the inconvenience, Miss Carter, he said, giving a polite nod before stepping back. Zoe responded with a small nod of acknowledgement. Her thoughts, however, were elsewhere. She watched as Julia retreated, a quiet satisfaction bubbling inside her. Zoe knew the other passengers were observing, some with curiosity, others with judgment, but that didn't matter. She had made her point. She had stood her ground, and that was all that mattered. But deep down, Zoe suspected this wouldn't be the end of it. A moment later, another woman, blonde, impeccably dressed, stepped into the cabin. It was Vanessa Hale, a seasoned traveler who carried herself with the unmistakable air of someone who expected the world to bow to her. As soon as she entered, her eyes locked on Zoe's, and the challenge shifted from one woman to the next. I believe I'm supposed to be in this seat, Vanessa stated, her voice laced with contempt. I always sit here. The attendant, recognizing the tension in the air, hesitated before replying. Let me check your seat assignment, he said, turning to his tablet with a slight sigh. Vanessa's voice grew sharper. I've been a loyal customer for years, she added with an air of superiority. First class is where I belong. I'm not going to accept anything less. Zoe, however, was unmoved. She had dealt with people like Vanessa before, people who thought their loyalty gave them the right to demand whatever they wanted. Zoe wasn't going to let that happen now. This is my seat, Zoe said firmly, her voice clear and unwavering, and I intend to stay in it. The attendant's indecision was palpable, but Vanessa wasn't backing down. With a smirk, she suggested, maybe you'd be more comfortable in business class. The insult was thinly veiled, but Zoe didn't flinch. She'd dealt with worse slights in her career, and she wasn't about to let this one get under her skin. I'm perfectly comfortable here, Zoe replied coolly, her gaze never wavering. The tension in the cabin grew thick, passengers watching in silence. Vanessa, rattled by Zoe's composure, demanded to speak with the supervisor. This is outrageous, she spat, her face flushed with indignation. Zoe remained unfazed, opening her notebook to jot a few notes, knowing exactly how this would unfold. Moments later, the supervisor, Diana Lang, appeared, visibly uncomfortable. Miss Carter, would you consider moving? She asked, her tone strained. Zoe didn't look up. I paid for this seat. I won't be moving, Vanessa's composure cracked. "Do you even know who I am?" she demanded. "I'm a Premier Elite member. I deserve this seat." Zoe's response was calm but cutting. "Your status doesn't give you ownership over what's mine. Respect is not a privilege." The words hung in the air. Even Diana seemed to shrink under the weight of Zoe's response. Vanessa's face reddened with rage, but Zoe stood firm. Minutes later, corporate representatives arrived. Zoe's steady gaze caught their attention, and within moments, Vanessa was moved to another seat, the tension dissipating. Zoe had once again asserted her place, showing that respect and dignity were her rights. The confrontation wouldn't be remembered, but her message would echo far beyond the cabin walls.